When most people think of the Nintendo Wii, they picture family-friendly, fun, motion-controlled minigame, and a console that brought gaming to the masses. But hidden beneath the cheerful surface lies a lineup of games that sparked debate, drew criticism, and challenged Nintendo's squeaky clean image. From titles that pushed the limits of violence to ones that stirred up cultural backlash, the Wii had its fair share of controversy. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the most controversial games ever released on the Nintendo Wii with 10 controversial Wii games. Madworld. Madworld was released in 2009 for the Nintendo Wii and became one of the most controversial titles ever published on the platform, largely because it stood in stark contrast to the family-friendly identity Nintendo had cultivated for the console. Developed by Platinum Games and published by Sega, Madworld was a hyper-violent black-and-white beat-em-up game that drenched its stark visuals in stylized red blood. Players assumed the role of Jack Kamen, a chainsaw-wielding contestant in a deadly game show where the objective was to kill enemies in the most brutal and creative ways possible. The sheer level of cartoonish gore, decapitations, impalements, and executions using street signs or garbage bins was designed to be over the top, but it shocked many who associated the Wii with titles like Wii Sports, Mario Kart, and Animal Crossing. Parents, critics, and media watchdogs immediately raised a red flag, accusing Sega of irresponsibly pushing an M-rated title onto a console predominantly owned by younger audiences. The controversy was amplified by the fact that Nintendo, traditionally cautious about mature content, had openly approved and supported the game's release, signaling what some saw as a cynical attempt to win over the hardcore gaming demographic. Beyond its visual violence, Madworld also stirred debate due to its tone and themes, which critics argued trivialized extreme brutality through humor. The game's in-game announcers, voiced by comedian Greg Proops and John DiMaggio, deliver vulgar, often profane commentary filled with sexual jokes, racial innuendos, and gleeful encouragement of violence. This irreverent style, while intended as satire of reality television and consumer culture, drew criticism from groups who felt it blurred the lines between parody and glorification. In the UK, the British Board of Film Classification reviewed the title carefully, though it ultimately allowed its release, noting that the comic book art style provided enough abstraction to differentiate from its realistic gore. Nevertheless, advocacy groups in Europe and Australia expressed concern that Madworld desensitized players to violence and represented a moral regression in video game content. While fans praised the game for its bold artistic direction and critique of media violence, detractors saw it as gratuitous and out of place on the Wii. In the end, Madworld didn't sell particularly well, but its legacy remains as a bold and polarizing statement, a lightning rod for the ongoing debate about mature content, platform identity, and the limits of artistic expression in gaming. Ju-On: The Grudge. When Ju-On was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2009, it quickly became a subject of controversy, not for excessive violence or explicit content, but how it challenged and in many ways subverted expectations of what constituted a game on the platform. Marketed as a haunted house simulator and based off the famous Japanese horror film franchise, Ju-On put players in the role of different characters navigating eerie, supernatural environments while being stalked by the ghostly Kayako and her son Toshio. What shocked many Wii players, especially those accustomed to more active, skill-based horror experiences, was that Ju-On intentionally stripped away combat, item use, and even traditional puzzle solving. Players could only walk, shine a flashlight, and watch scripted scare sequences unfold. The controversial design choice was seen by many gamers and critics as a betrayal of interactivity, especially when compared to survival horror games like Resident Evil 4 or Silent Hill: Shattered Memories, which offered deeper mechanics. Some accused the developers of lazily cashing in on the Ju-On license by producing what they saw as little more as a slow-moving, glorified slideshow of jump scares. Adding to the controversy was the game's reception among Western critics and horror game purists, many of whom panned it for poor controls, an almost complete lack of agency, and an over-reliance on cheap scares, rather than psychological tension or narrative depth. The motion controls, core to the Wii's appeal, were widely criticized for being sluggish and imprecise, often turning already tense moments into sources of frustration. This mechanical clumsiness, paired with the game's minimalist structure, fueled accusation that Ju-on: The Grudge wasn't just a bad game, but a deliberate exploitation of the horror genre's popularity on a platform ill-suited to deliver serious frights. Furthermore, the game's marketing in North America emphasized its roots in Japanese horror cinema, a genre not always well understood or appreciated by mainstream Western audiences. This led to a backlash among players who felt misled by the promise of an immersive experience, only to receive what some described as a non-game. The controversy surrounding Ju-on wasn't just about its quality. It raised deeper questions about what defines a video game, how horror should be executed interactively, and whether a cinematic license alone is enough to justify entry into the gaming space. Okay, so before we get into this one, I kind of debated on it. Not about whether I should add it or not, but because, I like to use songs from the game. Well, I just want to go on and get this out of the way. The music in this section is not from Alvin and the Chipmunks. All the songs I could find from this game were just helium-ingested versions of actual songs, and I didn't want to put you all through that, because I didn't want to have to listen to it. Alvin and the Chipmunks was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2007 as a tie-in to the live-action film. It quickly became a lightning rod for controversy, not for inappropriate content, but for what many saw as a prime example of exploitative, low-effort licensed gaming. Developed by Brash Entertainment, the game was widely condemned for its subpar visuals, repetitive gameplay, and lack of meaningful interaction with the Wii's unique motion controls. Despite being aimed at children, its design was shallow and tedious, relying on rudimentary rhythm mechanics with little creativity or challenge. Critics and parents alike accused the publishers of rushing the game to coincide with the film's release, prioritizing profit over quality and using the recognizable brand to mislead unsuspecting buyers, especially during the holiday season. As a result, Alvin and the Chipmunks became emblematic of the troubling trend during the Wii era, where many movie tie-ins were pushed to the market with minimal testing or innovation, with Alvin and the Chipmunks being frequently cited as one of the worst games ever released on the Wii. The controversy surrounding the game extended into broader conversations about ethics in children's game publishing. Parents voiced concern that Alvin and the Chipmunks, while carrying the familiar charm of the beloved characters and family-friendly branding, delivered a joyless, frustrating experience that bored children and misused the Wii's hardware capabilities. Its clunky visuals, canned animations, and unresponsive controls contributed to its poor reputation, while its soundtrack, composed of high-pitched covers of popular songs, see, I told you, not going to subject you to that, quickly wore thin. Critics pointed out that even young players, the game's primary audience, deserve thoughtfully crafted, interactive experiences, and that titles like this one risk alienating new gamers by offering a broken, unengaging first impression of what video games could be. The situation ignited debates about quality control in kid-targeted titles, especially when linked to major IPs with a built-in fanbase. To this day, Alvin and the Chipmunks is remembered not just as a bad game, but as a cautionary tale, one of the most glaring examples of how brand recognition can be exploited at the expense of quality. Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2007, 2 years after its original debut on the GameCube. It sparked renewed controversy, particularly surrounding the appropriateness of such a graphically violent and mature game on a platform known for its family-friendly image. While the Wii version was widely praised for its enhanced aiming mechanics through motion controls, it reignited public debates about content ratings and the visibility of violent games on mainstream consoles, especially ones marketed heavily to children and casual gamers. The game featured intense gunplay, grotesque enemies, and disturbing imagery, including scenes of decapitation, burning villages, and parasitic mutations, elements that pushed the boundaries of the ESRB's M for Mature rating. Critics and parents groups questioned Nintendo's decision to support the title, arguing that Resident Evil 4 clashed with the company's traditional wholesome reputation. Though the game was critically acclaimed, the controversy focused less on the content itself and more on the stark tonal contrast it introduced to the Wii's public-facing identity, prompting discussions about whether Nintendo was broadening its audience at the expense of its brand clarity. Beyond platform identity concerns, Resident Evil 4 also faced cultural and ethical scrutiny for its portrayal of rural Spaniards as zombie-like antagonists. Set in a fictional European village, the game depicted its enemies, known as the Ganados, as torch-wielding peasants controlled by a sinister cult. Critics and cultural commentators raised alarms over the way the game visually and behaviorally stereotyped impoverished European communities, reducing them to violent, mindless mobs with exaggerated rural accents and primitive lifestyles. Though the game attempted to establish a fictional context to the Las Plagas parasite, some viewers saw uncomfortable parallels with real-world depictions of marginalized rural population. This controversy was amplified on the Wii, where a new, younger demographic could potentially be exposed to these themes without proper context. The debate over Resident Evil 4's reputation of the other became part of a larger conversation in media criticism about how video games, intentionally or not, can reinforce harmful stereotypes through enemy design and world building. Despite these controversies, the Wii version of Resident Evil 4 remains one of the most acclaimed ports of the game, celebrated for its intuitive controls, strong replay value, and even as its thematic elements continue to spark critical reflection. Cursed Mountain. Cursed Mountain was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2009 and sparked controversy due to its mature themes, spiritual imagery, and unexpected inclusion of Buddhist rituals and Himalayan religious symbolism, elements that were rarely seen in mainstream console games, especially on a platform like the Wii. Developed by Deep Silver and set in the remote Tibetan Himalayas, the game follows a mountaineer who ascends a cursed peak to find his missing brother while confronting ghosts, demons, and ancient curses inspired by local mythologies. While praised for its atmospheric storytelling and unique setting, Cursed Mountain drew criticism from certain religious scholars and cultural commentators who argued that it misrepresented or sensationalized sacred Tibetan beliefs. Rituals, mantras, and deities were often recontextualized as gameplay mechanics or horror set pieces, leading to concern that the game was commodifying deeply spiritual elements for entertainment value. This prompted discussions about cultural appropriation and whether Western developers had the authority or understanding to depict such sacred traditions, especially when using them as the backdrop for ghost stories and supernatural horror. Adding to the controversy was the game's unsettling tone and the way it handled death and spiritual torment, particularly in the context of Buddhist cosmology. Unlike typical horror games that rely on gore and jump scares, Cursed Mountain leaned heavily into existential dread, portraying suffering souls trapped in the bardo, the Tibetan state between life and rebirth. Some players and critics found this psychological and spiritual approach to horror refreshing, but others considered it disrespectful and exploitative. The use of Buddhist chanting, exorcism rituals, and depictions of wrathful deities with combat sequences drew specific ire for stripping these practices of their sacred context and repurposing them as combat mechanics. Furthermore, the decision to release such a thematically heavy and dark game on the Wii raised eyebrows and intensified the scrutiny. While Cursed Mountain has gained a cult following for its narrative ambition and atmosphere, it remains a controversial entry in the Wii library, remembered as much for its bold spiritual themes as for the ethical questions it raised about cultural representation in gaming. Before we move on with our list, I'd love to know what you think so far. Sound off in the comments below if you're enjoying this video. And while you're down there, be sure to hit the like button. It helps out more than you know. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Okay, back to the list. House of the Dead Overkill. When House of the Dead Overkill launched on the Wii in 2009, it ignited immediate controversy for its unapologetically extensive profanity, graphic violence, and grindhouse-inspired aesthetic, elements that clashed dramatically with the Wii's reputation. Developed by Headstrong Games and published by Sega, Overkill reimagined the classic House of the Dead light gun formula through the lens of 1970s exploitation cinema, complete with intentionally degraded film grain, campy dialogue, and over-the-top gore. However, what made it particularly infamous was its dialogue, which reportedly broke the Guinness World Record at the time for the most uses of the F-word in a video game, with over 180 instances. This staggering number triggered outrage from media watchdog groups and parents, many of whom believed such content was wildly inappropriate for the Wii's younger audience. While the game carried an M for Mature ESRB rating, critics argued that its placement on the Wii made it more accessible to children and called into question Nintendo's content curation policies. The contrast between Overkill's tone and the platform's typical offerings led to heated debates about whether Nintendo was compromising its brand identity in an attempt to attract a more hardcore demographic. Beyond the profanity, House of the Dead Overkill was also controversial for its deliberate use of vulgar stereotypes, sexual innuendo, and grotesque humor, all hallmarks of the grindhouse genre, but rare in mainstream gaming. Characters like Agent G and Detective Isaac Washington spouted sexually charged one-liners and raunchy banter while blasting through hordes of zombies, mutant strippers, and grotesque bosses, including one infamous level set in a mutant-infested strip club. Feminist critics and cultural analysis condemned the game for its portrayal of women, arguing that it relied heavily on sexist tropes and objectification under the guise of parody. Additionally, disability advocates raised concern over the portrayal of disfigured enemies and mental illness as horror elements, claiming the game perpetuated harmful stigmas. While fans praised Overkill for its stylistic boldness and satirical self-awareness, detractors saw it as a tasteless, gratuitous misstep, especially coming from a publisher like Sega and appearing on a console more commonly associated with Mario Kart. In the end, House of the Dead Overkill became a cult classic, but also a lightning rod for controversy, raising important questions about platform identity, satire, and the boundaries of taste in video game design. Call of Duty Modern Warfare Reflex Edition. When Modern Warfare Reflex Edition was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2009, it stirred controversy not for its narrative or violence, already well known from the original 2007 release, but because of the stark technological and gameplay compromises made in adapting such a graphically intense, cinematic experience to the underpowered Wii hardware. Developed by Treyarch as a port of Infinity Ward's landmark Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the Reflex Edition was a scaled-back version with reduced textures, simplified effects, and frequent frame rate drops. Hardcore fans and tech critics alike question whether the Wii should have hosted the game at all, considering the vast disparity in visual fidelity and performance compared to its Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC counterparts. While the Wii version made intuitive use of motion controls to replicate aiming and shooting, many players found the control scheme clunky and awkward, particularly in the game's faster-paced multiplayer modes. The controversy wasn't just technical, it touched on broader questions of platform suitability and whether major publishers were sacrificing artistic integrity to squeeze blockbuster titles into any system that would sell them, regardless of the result. Moreover, Modern Warfare Reflex Edition faced cultural and parental backlash for bringing mature, realistic warfare to a console predominantly seen as family-oriented. The Wii's brand identity at the time was built around accessibility, motion-based party games, and placing a gritty military shooter complete with graphic violence, disturbing wartime scenarios, and morally ambiguous missions such as the infamous shock and awe bombing sequence onto the same shelf as Mario Kart felt jarring to many parents and educators. Despite its infra-mature ESRB rating, critics worried that the Wii's accessible reputation and large install base of younger users made it more likely that underage players would gain access to the game. The inclusion of full multiplayer capabilities also raised concern about exposure to toxic online environments and inappropriate language, especially given the Wii's lack of robust online parental controls compared to other platforms. Ultimately, While Reflex Edition was lauded for its ambition in bringing a complex title to the Wii, its presence on the console fueled ongoing debates about age-appropriate content, hardware limitations, and the risk of diluting a franchise's impact through forced portability.
I know, because I was there.
The Conduit. The Conduit launched for the Nintendo Wii in 2009. It was positioned as a breakthrough, an ambitious attempt to bring a high-quality, hardcore first-person shooter experience to a console best known for family-friendly titles. Developed by high-voltage software and powered by the proprietary Quantum 3 engine, the Conduit garnered significant pre-release hype, with many calling it the Wii's answer to Halo. However, that high expectation quickly gave way to controversy when the final product failed to meet the lofty promises made by the developers and publishers at Sega. Critics and players noted that while the game featured impressive visuals by Wii standards, its narrative was cliched. Enemy AI was underwhelming and level design uninspired. The backlash centered around the disconnect between how the game was marketed as a technical gameplay revolution for the platform and the reality, which many felt resembled a mediocre shooter propped up by overzealous promotion. This led to accusations that High Voltage had overhyped their technology and falsely positioned the game as a console savior, resulting in widespread disappointment and critical re-evaluation of whether the Wii was truly suited for traditional first-person shooter experiences. Another layer of controversy came from the Conduit's political and thematic overtones. The storyline, which involved a corrupt government agency, alien conspiracies, and surveillance-based paranoia, while the game didn't include graphic violence on the level of M-rated shooters, its tone was unusually serious and dystopian for a Wii title. Featuring a protagonist who engages in morally gray missions under orders from shady intelligence operatives. This tone clashed with the broader image of the Wii as a console centered around accessibility, optimism, and family entertainment. Some parents expressed concern that the game's realistic themes and tones were a deliberate attempt to lure younger audiences into more mature territory under the guise of sci-fi action. Additionally, online multiplayer, rare for a Wii title, raised further issues around moderation, voice chat, and the potential for unfiltered interactions in a game rated T for teen. While the Conduit is remembered today for pushing technical boundaries on limited hardware, it also remains a case study in mismatched audience targeting and the perils of overpromising in the game marketing. No More Heroes. No More Heroes released in 2007 and follows Travis Touchdown, an eccentric, crude protagonist who enters a brutal assassination tournament in order to rise to the top of the leaderboard. What made No More Heroes controversial was not just its graphic violence, but the way in which the game subverted the expectations of typical games on the Wii platform. The game featured over-the-top, gory combat, where players could engage in brutal sword fights, decapitations, and blood splatters. The contrast between the game's mature content and the Wii's reputation caused concerns among parents, critics, and even some Nintendo fans. The absurdity of violence paired with dark humor and mature themes made it clear that No More Heroes was not for the faint of heart, leading to debates about whether the game was an appropriate fit for the Wii's audience. In addition to the violence, No More Heroes was controversial for its explicit language and themes of sexuality, rebellion, and anti-establishment sentiments. Travis Touchdown's character was portrayed as a lewd, lazy, and often disrespectful figure, engaging in crude banter and frequent use of profanity. The game also included moments that were intentionally shocking, such as the infamous scene where players could charge up their beam katana using sexual gestures, an irreverent nod to the exploitation genre. The game style was a deliberate blend of retro grindhouse-inspired visuals with a satirical narrative that critiqued the gaming industry's obsession with violence and fame. Many critics and consumers found No More Heroes to be an odd juxtaposition against other titles typically found on the Wii, sparking discussions about whether such content had a place on the console. The mature themes, combined with the violent gameplay and Suda51's signature surrealism, created a game that both shocked and fascinated players, earning a dedicated fanbase, but also facing backlash from those who felt it crossed the line for what should be acceptable in video games. The controversy surrounding No More Heroes helped establish it as one of the most unique and polarizing titles in the Wii's library. Manhunt 2. Manhunt 2 released in 2007, introducing players to a psychologically twisted narrative in which they controlled a man named Daniel Lamb, who has escaped from a psychiatric institution. Throughout the game, players are encouraged to engage in stealth-based executions, silently stalking and killing enemies in gruesome, often sadistic ways. The violence is not just a gameplay mechanic, but a central theme, with kills depicted in excruciating detail using weapons like plastic bags, blunt objects, and knives. The game's most controversial aspect on the Wii was how it used motion controls to simulate these acts. Players would physically mimic the motion of stabbing, slashing, or strangling, making the violence feel disturbingly personal and immersive. The explicit nature of these sequences pushed the boundaries of what had previously been seen on the Nintendo platform, sparking immediate backlash from critics, parents, and advocacy groups. The controversy escalated further when Manhunt initially received an adults-only rating from the ESRB, a designation that essentially banned it from being sold in most major retailers and prevented it from being released on home consoles like the PlayStation and Wii without modifications. Rockstar ultimately toned down some of the game's most graphic content to secure an M rating, but the firestorm was already raging. The game's notoriety reached national media coverage, including a CBS News segment that questioned whether the lines between virtual entertainment and real-world violence had been crossed.
It's American stores tomorrow, and it's making a lot of noise. There's an international outcry against it. Manhunt 2 is so violent, it's been banned in Britain. In fact, you may not want your kids to see the preview of this game in Daniel Seberg's.
Critics claim that Manhunt 2 glorified killing and could desensitize players, especially young ones, to brutality. Supporters, however, argued that the game was a form of dark artistic expression, no different from violent films or books. The fact that such graphic content was available on the Wii only added fuel to the fire. Ultimately, Manhunt 2 became a landmark in the ongoing conversation about video game violence, censorship, and the role of mature content in an industry often viewed through the lens of mainstream acceptability. While known for its family-friendly appeal and innovative motion controls, the Wii was also home to a surprising number of controversial titles that pushed the boundaries of what was expected from the console. These games challenged both the public's perception of the Wii and the gaming industry's ability to balance creativity with responsibility. They sparked debates about censorship, the impact of video game violence, and the role of mature content in interactive media. Whether seen as an artistic expression or reckless provocations, these games left a lasting impact on the gaming world, proving that even in the most unexpected places, controversy can thrive. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. What are your thoughts on the games on this list? While I am a huge Nintendo fan, I just really couldn't get into the Wii. A lot of the games I got for it were mostly first-party games, Mario, Zelda, those type of games. I didn't really go for I guess it would be third-party titles. I didn't really go for those. I didn't play my Wii much. I mostly played my 360. But anyway, I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments below of any of your favorite memories of the Wii, anything you have to say about the games on this list, just anything. I'd love to get a conversation going with you in the comments below. If you liked this video, please leave a like. If you didn't, that other button seems to work pretty well too. If you'd like to support the channel in a more personal way, please consider becoming a member or checking out the links below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a plethora of gaming-related content, including but not limited to controversial games. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.